My name is Jack O'Malley, but for 40 years the only name written on my hard hat was Red. I'm 65 years old, and I walk with a limp that tells you the barometric pressure faster than the weatherman can. I've spent my entire adult life in the timber industry, working the high lead shows on the steep, rain-soaked slopes of Vancouver Island and the Pacific Northwest. They call us timber beasts or stump jumpers. We are the men who go where the machines can't, dragging steel cables through Devil's Club and Salal, felling trees that were saplings when the Vikings were building longships. I've seen men crushed by rolling logs. I've seen cables snap and cut a pickup truck in half. I've seen the woods try to kill us in 1,000 different ways, but I never saw the woods actually fight back with strategy and anger until the autumn of 1999. In a remote cut block we called the Green Gullet. You want to know about the attack. You want to hear about the monsters screaming in the mist and the rocks smashing through safety glass. I'll tell you. But you have to understand, what happened that day wasn't a hunt. It wasn't a monster movie. It was a desperate, violent plea for help from a species that is stronger than us, but just as vulnerable to gravity. I am telling this story now because I'm dying. The doctors found spots on my lungs, sawdust and diesel fumes finally collecting their debt, and I don't have to worry about the company blacklisting me anymore. I want the truth on the record. Bigfoot is real. They are out there. And on one rainy Tuesday in November, I didn't shoot one. I worked for one. The job was a heli show deep in the Nootka Sound. That means the terrain was too steep for roads and too gnarly for skidders. We were felling the timber by hand, and a heavy-lift helicopter, a Sikorsky S-64 Sky Crane, was flying the logs out one by one. It's the most expensive, dangerous way to log, but the timber in the gullet was worth it. We were chasing gold wood, ancient western red cedar, trees that were 10, 12 feet in diameter, the kind of wood that ends up as veneer in mansions in Tokyo or beams in lodges in Aspen. I was the bullbucker, the foreman of the felling crew. I had 4 guys under me, 2 veterans, heavy drinkers named Miller and Stumpy, and 2 greenhorns who looked like they'd never held a chainsaw that weighed more than their lunch boxes. The weather that week was typical for the coast, relentless, driving rain that turned the ground into a slurry of mud and slate. We were soaked to the bone before we even left the crummy, the crew transport truck at the bottom of the landing. The air smelled of wet wool, 2-stroke exhaust, and the pungent, spicy scent of crushed cedar. We hiked in 2 miles to the face. The target for the day was a specific grove of cedars clinging to a shelf of rock about halfway up the mountain. In the center of the grove stood the Monarch. That's what we called it. It was the biggest tree I had ever seen in my life, and I've cut down forests for a living. It was easily 15 feet across at the butt. The bark was gray and stringy, hanging off in strips like the skin of a zombie. The top was stag-headed, dead and broken off, but the trunk was solid. It was a skyscraper of wood. I walked up to it, wiping the rain from my eyes. I put my hand on the bark. It felt cold and hard, like stone. I had a bad feeling about it. Not a mystical feeling, just a rigger's instinct. Trees that big, growing on slopes that steep, usually have bad holding wood. They are full of rot, or they are under so much tension that when you make the back cut, they explode. We call them barber chairs, when the tree splits vertically and kicks out, taking your head off before you can blink. "Boss, you want us to lay it uphill or contour?" Miller asked, firing up his Husqvarna saw. The sound was a deafening scream in the quiet woods. "We lay it along the contour," I shouted over the idle. "If we drop it downhill, it'll shatter. It's too heavy. We need to bed it in the brush." I marked the face cut with my axe, chopping a notch into the massive trunk to guide the fall. The wood was dark red, almost purple. It bled sap that smelled incredible, a perfume of pure history. I felt a pang of guilt. I always did with the big ones. Killing a tree like this felt like shooting an elephant, but the mortgage doesn't pay itself, and the company wanted the wood. It took us 3 hours to put the undercut in. We had to use a double bar setup, 2 saws cutting from opposite sides to meet in the middle. The sawdust piled up around our boots like drifts of orange snow. The rain kept falling, slicking the handles of the saws, making the footing treacherous. By noon, we were ready for the back cut. This is the moment of truth. Once you start the back cut, the tree is committed. Gravity takes the wheel. "Clear the area!" I yelled, my voice ragged. "Everyone back! Escape paths!" The greenhorns scrambled up the slope, hiding behind stumps. Miller and Stumpy moved to the flanks. I took the main saw. I dug my caulked boots into the log, braced my shoulder against the power head, and pulled the trigger. The chain bit in. The engine screamed. I watched the kerf, the cut, opening up. I was watching for the lift, the moment the tree starts to tip. It happened fast. Too fast. Usually a tree this size moves in slow motion. It groans, it leans, and it crashes with a majestic slowness. The monarch didn't groan. It popped. Crack boom. The sound was like a cannon shot. The holding wood inside was rotten. I had misjudged it. The center of the tree was hollow, a chimney of rot hidden by the solid outer shell. The hinge snapped prematurely. "Run!" I screamed, dropping the saw and diving backward. The tree didn't fall where I aimed it. It twisted. It spun on the stump, barber chairing violently. A slab of wood the size of a minivan kicked out backward, missing me by inches, slamming into the mud where I'd been standing a second before. Then the main trunk came down. It fell sideways, crashing through the canopy, destroying smaller hemlocks and firs on its way down. It hit the ground with a force that shook the mountain. I felt the impact in my teeth. Mud and water sprayed into the air like a geyser. Then silence. The saw was idling on its side in the mud. The rain hissed on the hot muffler. The crew was silent, staring at the fallen giant. It lay on its side, a massive, dark wall of wood, blocking the view of the ravine below. We had dropped it. It was ugly, dangerous work, but it was down. "Jesus, Red," Miller said, stepping out from behind a stump, his face pale. "That thing tried to kill you." "It missed," I grunted, standing up and checking my limbs. "Let's get it bucked. I want to be out of here before dark." I walked toward the fallen tree to inspect the quality of the wood. I climbed up onto the massive trunk, my cork boots biting into the bark. I walked along the length of it, looking for cracks. That was when I heard it. It wasn't the sound of a bear. It wasn't the sound of a cougar. It was a scream. But it sounded human. Yet, it had a volume and a depth that no human lungs could produce. It came from the dense brush on the uphill side of the cut block directly above us. "Roar!" The sound froze us. It echoed off the canyon walls, silencing the rain. It was filled with a rage so palpable it felt like heat. "What the hell was that?" one of the greenhorns whimpered. Before I could answer, a rock the size of a basketball sailed out of the mist. It didn't roll. It was thrown. It flew through the air with terrifying velocity and smashed into the engine block of the crew truck parked 50 yards away on the logging road. Crunch. The hood of the truck crumpled. Steam hissed from the radiator. "Incoming!" Miller yelled. "Take cover!" Suddenly, the tree line exploded with motion. I saw them. Not one. 3 of them. They charged out of the hemlocks, moving on 2 legs with a speed that defied their size. They were massive, covered in wet, dark hair that looked like black moss. They were screaming, tearing up small trees as they ran, hurling stones and branches at us. It was an ambush. "Bear!" Stumpy yelled, grabbing his axe. "It's a bear!" "That ain't no bear," I shouted, sliding down the side of the fallen cedar to use it as cover. "Get back! Get to the truck!" But the truck was already being destroyed. A second rock smashed through the windshield. A third one hit the door, caving it in. The creatures weren't coming closer. They were staying on the ridge, pelting us with artillery. They were pinning us down. I peeked over the top of the log. I saw the lead creature, the biggest one. It stood at least 9 feet tall. It was shaking a fir tree back and forth, snapping the trunk, roaring at us. Its face was a mask of fury, teeth bared, eyes wide and white-rimmed. This wasn't a territorial display. This was a kill box. "They're flanking us," Miller screamed. He pointed to the left. Another shape was moving through the brush, cutting off our escape route back to the road. "We can't get to the truck," I realized. "They're herding us." The greenhorns broke. Panic took over. They dropped their gear and ran, scrambling blindly down the steep slope, away from the road, away from the truck, sliding into the deep ravine below the cut block. Miller and Stumpy followed them. "Wait," I yelled. "Don't split up." But they were gone, disappearing into the fog and the slash. I was alone. I was crouching behind the massive bulk of the cedar I had just felled. I had a chainsaw, an axe, and a radio that was clipped to my belt. I grabbed the radio. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Felling Crew 7. We are under attack. Large predators. We have crew scattered. Send the bird. Send the heli. Static." The terrain was blocking the signal. I looked up at the ridge. The bombing had stopped. The screaming had stopped. The silence was worse. I heard a heavy thud on the other side of the log. Then another, footsteps. Heavy, wet footsteps slapping on the mud. Something was walking along the length of the fallen tree, moving toward me. I gripped the handle of my axe. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I was 65 years old. I was tired. But I wasn't going to die hiding in the dirt. I stood up. I raised the axe. "Come on then," I roared, my voice cracking. "You want me? Come and get me." The creature stepped into view atop the log. It was the big male, the alpha. Up close, he was terrifying. His smell hit me first, a wall of musk, wet dog, and rotting skunk cabbage. He towered over me, looking down from the top of the fallen cedar. Rain dripped from his matted fur. His chest was heaving. He didn't attack. He didn't jump down and rip me apart. He looked at me. Then he looked down at his feet, at the log he was standing on. Then he looked back at me. He pointed. He pointed a massive black finger directly at the log. Then he pointed at the sky, where the heavy lift helicopter would usually be. Then he pantomimed a lifting motion. He squatted down, hooked his hands under an imaginary weight, and pulled up, grunting. I lowered the axe slightly, confusion warring with terror. "What?" I whispered. He did it again. He pointed at the log. He pointed at the sky. Then he pointed under the log. He let out a sound. It wasn't a roar. It was a whimper, a high-pitched, desperate keening sound that didn't fit a monster of his size. It was the sound a parent makes when they are watching their child die. I stepped closer, my legs trembling. I looked at where he was pointing. The massive cedar, when it had barber-chaired and fallen, had crashed onto a rocky depression, a small hollow in the ground that had been hidden by ferns. I leaned over and looked into the gap beneath the crushing weight of the trunk. There, pinned in the mud, trapped by 20 tons of ancient wood, was a hand, a small, hairy hand. It was twitching. The attack wasn't an ambush. The rocks weren't meant to kill us. They were meant to stop us from leaving. They were trying to get our attention. The giant looked at me, his eyes pleading, stripped of all aggression. He made the lifting motion again. He wanted me to lift the tree. I looked at the log. It weighed 50,000 pounds. I looked at the giant. He couldn't lift it. I couldn't lift it. Even if the whole crew came back, we couldn't lift it. But I knew what could. I looked at the radio on my belt. I looked at the sky. "The sky crane," I whispered. The giant nodded. I stood there in the rain, my hand hovering over the radio on my belt, staring up at the creature that could snap me in half like a piece of kindling. The bargain was struck in silence. There were no handshakes, no nods of understanding, just the heavy, crushing weight of necessity. The alpha male, I called him the bull in my head, because he carried himself with the same arrogant mass as a herd sire, stepped back from the log. He looked at the trapped hand of the juvenile, then at me. His expression was expectant. He had done his part. He had stopped the violence. Now it was my turn to bring the sky down. I unclipped the radio. The static was thick, a wash of white noise caused by the storm clouds and the iron in the mountains. I held the device up high, pressing the transmit button with a thumb that felt numb. "Base, this is O'Malley. Come in, Base." Nothing but hiss. The canyon walls were blocking the signal. I needed altitude. I looked at the bull. I pointed to the radio, then pointed to the high ridge above the cut block, the same ridge they had used to ambush us. "No signal," I said, tapping the radio. "I need to go up." The bull tilted his head. He understood the concept of high ground. He grunted, a low, vibrating sound that I felt in my chest, and turned. He didn't walk behind me. He walked beside me. It was an escort. The other two creatures, a female, likely the mother, and a younger male, emerged from the brush. They were soaked, their fur matted to their bodies, revealing the terrifying density of their muscles. The female went straight to the log. She crouched down by the trapped hand, making soft, cooing sounds that were heartbreakingly human. She tried to lift the log herself, her back straining, her feet slipping in the mud, but 50,000 pounds of wet cedar didn't budge. It just groaned, settling deeper into the mud. I turned away and started climbing the slope. The bull matched my pace. He moved through the slash, the tangle of broken branches and stumps, without making a sound. I was stumbling, slipping on the slick bark, gasping for air, while he glided over the terrain like oil over water. When we reached the ridge, the wind hit us hard, driving the rain sideways. I pulled the radio again. "Sky Crane 1, this is O'Malley. Do you copy? Over." A crackle, then a voice, thin and metallic. "O'Malley, this is Sky Crane. We heard a Mayday call. We have the sheriff rolling. What is your status? Over." I hesitated. If I told them the truth, that I was standing next to a Sasquatch and we needed a lift for a baby monster, they would ground the fleet and send a SWAT team. And by the time they got here, the juvenile would be dead from crush syndrome or hypothermia. I had to lie. I had to use the one currency that works in the timber industry, human life. "Negative on the sheriff," I shouted into the mic. "We have a man down. Repeat, man down, pinned by a log. Critical condition. We need an immediate extraction. I need a heavy lift to get the weight off him. Over." "Copy, man down," the pilot's voice sharpened. It was Jenkins, a veteran flyer who had done tours in Vietnam. He didn't panic. "We are 10 mics out. Weather is garbage red. Ceiling is low. Can you rig the load? Over." "I can rig it," I said. "But you gotta come in hot. Don't wait for the weather. He's fading. Over." "We're inbound. Mark the zone. Out." I lowered the radio. I looked at the bull. He was watching me, his eyes tracking the movement of my lips. He knew I was talking to the metal birds. He knew help was coming. 10 minutes, I said to him, holding up 10 fingers. The radio silence that followed my call to the Sky Crane was heavier than the leaden sky pressing down on the Nootka Sound. Jenkins had said 10 mics, 10 minutes, but in the mountains time is a fluid thing, dictated by wind shear and visibility. 10 minutes stretched into 20, then 30. The rain, which had abated for a moment, returned with a vengeance, turning the cut block into a sliding slurry of mud and slate. The temperature dropped. I could feel the cold seeping through my caulk boots, numbing my toes, but the cold wasn't what I was worried about. I was worried about crush syndrome. I knew enough first aid to be dangerous. I knew that when a heavy weight pins a limb for too long, toxins build up in the muscle. If you lift the weight suddenly without preparing the patient, those toxins flood the heart and you die. The juvenile Sasquatch, I had started calling him the kid in my head, was fading. His hand, still visible in the mud beneath the cedar log, was cold to the touch. The mother was huddled over the spot where the rest of him was buried, her massive body acting as a living umbrella, shivering violently. The bull stood guard at the edge of the clearing, his eyes fixed on the logging road, watching for the return of the monsters that had come with the machines. I couldn't just wait. I had to stabilize the load. I ran back to the crummy. My crew had fled in a panic, leaving the doors wide open. The cab was soaked. I rummaged through the toolboxes behind the seat. I found what I was looking for, a pair of hydraulic bottle jacks and a chainsaw wrench. I also grabbed the first aid kit, a heavy orange box that hadn't been opened since 1985. I ran back to the log. The bull watched me approach, a low growl rumbling in his throat. He was on edge. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by the cold reality of the trap. "Easy," I whispered, holding up the jacks. "Tools. Just tools." I knelt in the mud next to the trapped hand. I needed to create a safety gap. If the log settled even an inch further due to the rain softening the ground, it would sever the arm or crush the kid's chest. I used my shovel to dig a flat shelf under the curve of the trunk, finding a solid piece of granite bedrock to brace against. I slid the first bottle jack into place, positioning the steel head against the solid wood of the tree. I pumped the handle. Clink, clink, clink. The jack hissed. The steel ram extended. It bit into the bark. I pumped harder, feeling the resistance of 50 tons of cedar. The jack groaned. It wasn't strong enough to lift the tree, but it was strong enough to hold it, to stop the sink. I set the second jack on the other side. The mother watched me. Her face was inches from mine. I could smell her breath, a mixture of berries and raw fish. She had eyes the color of amber, wide and terrified but intelligent. She understood what the jacks were. She reached out a finger, thick and leathery, and touched the steel ram. She looked at me and let out a soft, whimpering exhale. "I got him," I said, my voice thick. "I won't let it drop." Then the radio on my belt crackled. It wasn't the pilot. "Red? Red, you copy?" It was Miller, my Sawyer, the one who had run. I grabbed the mic. "Miller, where are you?" "We're at the landing, Red. We made it down. We got the rifles from the Crumbies down here. Stumpy and the Greenhorns are loading up. We're coming back up. We're gonna get you out." My blood ran cold. They were coming back, and they were bringing high-caliber bear rifles. "Negative!" I shouted. "Miller, stay put. Do not come back up here. The area is hot." "We aren't leaving you to get eaten, boss," Miller yelled back, his voice slurred with panic and probably the flask of whiskey he kept in his boot. "We're coming and shooting. We're going to kill those freaks." "Miller, listen to me," I screamed. "They aren't eating me. It's a rescue op. I have a chopper inbound. If you come up here with guns, you're going to spook them and I'm dead. Do you hear me? Stand down." "We're already rolling, Red. ETA 5 minutes. Sit tight." The radio clicked off. I looked at the bull. He had heard the voice on the radio. He recognized the tone of aggression. He stood up to his full height, 9 feet of bristling muscle and rage. He looked down the logging road. He could hear the truck engines before I could. He bared his teeth, a wall of yellow ivory that could crush a human skull like a grape. He wasn't going to run. He was going to fight. He was going to defend his family against the men with the thunder sticks, and if a firefight started, the kid under the log was doomed. The pilot would never land in a hot zone. I had to make a choice. I was a logger. I was a foreman. These were my men, but they were wrong. They were reacting out of fear, and fear makes men dangerous. I grabbed my axe. I walked to the middle of the logging road, about 50 yards downhill from the log. There was a narrow choke point where the road cut through a rock face. I stood there, planting my feet in the mud. I wasn't just guarding the Sasquatch. I was guarding my men from the massacre that would happen if they tried to engage the bull. The sound of the truck engine grew louder. Headlights swept across the wet trees. Miller's pickup, a beat-up Ford, came roaring around the bend, tires spinning in the slush. Stumpy was in the passenger seat, a .30-06 rifle barrel sticking out the window. I raised the axe. "Stop!" I bellowed. Miller slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded to a halt 10 feet from me. "Red, Stumpy yelled, kicking the door open. "Get in! Where are they?" "Put the gun down, Stumpy," I said, stepping forward. "Are you crazy?" Miller shouted, leaning out the window. "We saw them, 3 of them. They wrecked the crummy. Get in the truck." I said, "Put it down." I walked up to Stumpy. He was shaking, adrenaline making him dangerous. I reached out and grabbed the barrel of the rifle, forcing it down toward the mud. "There is no attack. Look at me. Am I bleeding? Am I dead?" Stumpy looked at me, confused. "But the rocks, the screaming." "They were scared," I said, looking him in the eye. "We dropped a tree on their kid. They were trying to get us to stop." "A kid?" Miller laughed, a high, hysterical sound. "They're monsters, Red. They're animals." "They're people," I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth but ringing with absolute truth. "And right now they are grieving parents. I have a sky crane coming to lift the log. If you fire that gun, if you start a war here, that helicopter waves off and that kid dies. And if that kid dies, the big male back there is going to tear this truck apart with you inside it." I pointed up the road. The bull had stepped out of the shadows. He stood in the center of the track, illuminated by the headlights. He didn't roar. He just stood there, arms loose at his sides, staring at the truck with a cold, terrifying assessment. Miller went silent. Stumpy lowered the rifle. They saw the size of him. They saw the intelligence. This wasn't a bear rearing up on its hind legs. This was a king defending his castle. "What do you want us to do?" Miller whispered. "Go back to the landing," I said. "Wait for the sheriff. Tell him it was a logging accident. Tell him I'm supervising a medevac. Do not mention the monkeys. If you say one word about Bigfoot, the circus comes to town and we never work in these woods again. You understand me?" Miller nodded slowly. He put the truck in reverse. "You're a crazy son of a bitch, Red. Go." I watched them back down the road until their taillights vanished. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I turned back to the bull. He hadn't moved. He nodded to me, a single sharp dip of the chin. "Dead acknowledged." I walked back to the log. The rain was turning to sleet. The temperature was dropping fast. We were losing the window. If the pilot didn't get here soon, the icing on the rotors would ground him. I knelt back down by the kid. The mother was shivering uncontrollably now. Hypothermia was setting in. I took off my heavy rain slicker. I hesitated for a second. It was my only protection. But then I draped it over her shoulders. It was comically small on her, but it was something. She looked at the yellow plastic, then at me. She pulled it tight around her neck. Then the sound came. Not the truck. Not the wind. Thump, thump, thump. The deep, rhythmic heartbeat of the S-64 sky crane. "He made it," I whispered. I grabbed the radio. "Sky crane, I hear you. Visual is poor. I have flares. Over." "Pop the flares, O'Malley," Jenkins radioed. "I'm flying on instruments up here. I need a target." I pulled a road flare from my belt, cracked the cap, and struck it. The red phosphorus hissed to life, casting a blood-colored light across the clearing. The Sasquatch recoiled from the harsh light, shielding their eyes. "It's okay," I yelled over the rotor wash. "It's the beacon." The helicopter descended out of the clouds like a dragon from a nightmare. The downwash was violent, whipping the sleet into a frenzy. The bull grabbed the mother and dragged her back into the timber. He stood at the edge of the light, watching. I ran out onto the log. I hooked the chokers to the long line. I felt the static shock, the power of the machine. "Up on the load," I screamed. The cable went tight. The log groaned, the mud sucked. But then, disaster. The log shifted. It didn't lift straight up. The base of the tree, the heavy root wad, was heavier than the top. The log pivoted. It rolled. "Stop!" I screamed. "Down! Down!" If the log rolled, it would crush the kid's head. The helicopter slackened the line. The log settled back with a sickening thud. I heard the kid scream, a high human sound of pure agony. "It's off balance," Jenkins shouted over the radio. "Center of gravity is too far back. I can't lift it flat. If I pull, it rolls." I looked at the log. We needed to counterweight the top end. We needed ballast, or we needed force. I looked at the bull. He saw the problem. He saw the log roll. He heard his child scream. He ran. He didn't run away. He ran toward the log. He ran into the rotor wash, into the red light of the flare. He ran to the top end of the log, the lighter end that was kicking up. He jumped onto the trunk. "What is that?" Jenkins yelled over the radio. "Red, there's a bear on the load." "It's not a bear," I screamed. "Lift it, he's the counterweight." The bull stood on the far end of the cedar, bracing his legs, adding 800 pounds of leverage to the equation. He roared at the helicopter, defying the machine. "Lift it, Jenkins, now!" The turbine screamed. The cable went tight. With the bull on the end, the physics changed. The log stayed flat. It broke the suction. It rose into the air, mud dripping from its underside like black rain. The bull rode the log. He rode it like a surfer on a wave of wood, 10 feet in the air, balancing with a grace that was impossible. "Clear!" I yelled. "The kid is clear!" The mother darted in. She grabbed the juvenile. He was limp, broken, but free. She dragged him back into the brush. "Set it down!" I screamed. Jenkins lowered the collective. The log crashed back to earth. The bull leaped off at the last second, rolling in the mud, springing to his feet instantly. He stood up. He looked at the helicopter hovering above him. He looked at me. He raised both arms in the air, not a threat, but a victory. "Cable away," Jenkins said, his voice shaking. "Red, what the hell did I just see?" "You saw a timber beast," I said, collapsing onto the wet ground. "Just a timber beast." The helicopter flew off, banking hard to escape the weather. The silence returned to the green gullet. I sat in the mud, the rain washing the sweat from my face. The bull walked over to me. The mother was in the background, holding her child. The kid was moving. He was going to make it. The bull stood over me. He reached into the matted fur of his chest. He pulled something out. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a tool. It was a pine cone, but not a normal pine cone. It was a fossilized cone turned to stone millions of years ago. It was heavy, dense, and perfect. He placed it gently in my hand. It was a payment, a trade, a life for a stone. He turned and walked away, fading into the mist with his family. I sat there for a long time, holding the stone pine cone. I knew then that I couldn't go back to logging, not like before. I couldn't cut down these trees. They weren't just lumber. They were the walls of a house I had no right to destroy. I quit the next day.